This program is a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line is made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line.
James Traub has written a book. It's called City on a Hill and subtitled Testing the American Dream at City College. It records the current life of a college founded in 1847, designed for the poor in New York. Up until a generation ago, more graduates of CCNY became PhDs than of any other college excepting Berkeley, and more Nobel Prizes were won by its graduates than by those of any other college. Today, City, as it is familiarly referred to, is a non-productive mess, much of it. And the book that identifies the problem teaches us about what ails it, as also other colleges similarly grounded with similar problems. In New York, that primary problem is the failure of the public schools. What brings on that failure is a question we'll touch on. Strauss spent a year at City and then pulled out and went to Harvard. From there, he joined with several magazines before joining The New Yorker, where he is now an editor. Nathan Glazer is one of the most renowned sociologists in America. He took his PhD in Columbia, was an editor of Commentary and a Doubleday anchor. He has lectured and taught at the University of California at Berkeley, at Bennington, at Smith, at Harvard, MIT. He is co-author of The Lonely Crowd, of Beyond the Melting Pot, author of Faces in the Crowd, American Judaism, the Social Basis of American Communism. He is himself a graduate of CCNY, and he sadly endorses the findings of Mr. Traub, which are that the open enrollment program instituted in 1969 sentenced City to the forlorn condition in which it now struggles. Let's ask Mr. Traub to outline briefly what are the evidences of this collapse.
Well, I should make two small corrections first. One is that I didn't spend a year at City College as a student. I spent a year at City College researching my book. And second, I don't think it's entirely a non-productive mess. That is, what I actually think is that it's hopelessly torn between its old identity, which gives it, in part, an elite character, has a wonderful engineering school, it has students who are working very hard, and the open admissions character, which is the thing which caused me to write the book, which tends to give it students who have an incredibly difficult time of actually getting an education and wind up failing out in large numbers. The purpose of my book was to really look at the question of social mobility. City College was a place worth writing about and worth thinking about because it so embodied the American ideal of allowing the poor to escape their poverty, to reach the middle class through institutions that would be provided for that. And City was a place that really exemplified the meritocratic idea that no matter what your background was, you could get ahead. Anybody could go there as long as they had a good enough high school education or a good enough high school score. The decisive event was this open admissions struggle in 1969, at the end of which City agreed, under incredible duress from militant students, that it would start taking students who had scored much less well in order to be able to finally bring black and Puerto Rican students who lived all around the campus, which is in Harlem, to bring them into the college. And it was not only a laudable motive in some ways, it was almost unavoidable. City had come to seem like such a bastion of white middle-class identity in the midst of this world of poverty. But the fact is, once that was done, nobody could really admit that the consequences of that were going to be disastrous for City's own standards, and in some ways they'd be disastrous for the students themselves.
But if the high schools had maintained the standards of yesteryear, then it wouldn't have mattered so much, would it? That they were able to send students there.
We have to come to the problem of why the high schools did not maintain the standards. I'm a graduate of James Monroe High School in the East Bronx, which is recently listed as one of two that are so disastrous it should be closed. When I was going to James Monroe, it was as it is now. It was then we used to call them working class neighborhoods. Now we call them lower class neighborhoods. But neighborhood still looks the same. We had 10,000 students and graduated 2,000 a year. That sort of estimates like an 80% graduation rate. half of whom at least had Regents diplomas and went on to city colleges. In recent years, it would bring in, it's been graduating 150 students a year. It's much smaller, of course. 3 of those, one recent year, had Regents diplomas, which are the standard academic diplomas. Now, this is, I think, the problem of City College that James Child's book certainly points out, among other things, but which some of the reviewers didn't catch, that if it were to maintain its elite standards, by elite, we're not being super elite, I mean academic standards, where would it get the students in terms of the New York City high schools? In view of their disastrous completion rates, and so on. And in effect, it is a dilemma, and it's a tragedy about in terms of what happened to the school. But you might say as follows: City College has always been related to New York's poor and New York's lower and aspiring classes. And something has happened to its poor and lower and aspiring classes that make it hard for it to continue to be what it was.
I think there's also there's interesting separation out at City College and at the other schools at City University between immigrants and between kids who grew up in the New York City area and went to New York City schools. And one of the striking things I found during the time I spent there is that the upper ranks of the college, and this is true at other City University colleges as well, were populated by kids who had grown up very, very poor, certainly had the same kind of upbringing as the poor kids who had gone there in the 30s and 40s, but because they had intact families, because they believed in education, because they had a certain sense of hopefulness about life, for reasons that were both educational. Maybe they had gone to school in a lycée in Port-au-Prince, or maybe they had gone to school someplace else. They were partially educational and partially cultural. They arrived there with the psychological and academic wherewithal that allowed them to succeed despite the fact that they often didn't speak English or spoke very little English when they arrived. So part of my point when I'm talking about this whole question of social mobility is who is being selected out there, who's succeeding and who's failing, and what does that tell us about the kind of characteristics that are causing inner city kids to fail and the kind of characteristics that still do lead to success?
Yeah, but as you point out, in effect, a lot of students have a sort of talismanic view of the college. You go there and things simply even get better for you, like the girl here who wanted to major in computer sciences because she liked to type.
Yes.
Now, who's responsible for that superstition? This is society at large, i.e., if you don't go to college, you're no good.
Right.
Now that ought to be so.
See, this is a big problem. And when people who criticize me for this book say, what are you suggesting these kids do? And that's a serious problem because our labor markets are so completely organized around college and the college degree because high school education is so bad that when AT&T looks for phone operators, you need to have a college degree because they want to make sure you're literate. It all turns into this sort of vicious circle. If you don't have a college education, and if you say to somebody, well, I'm afraid you can't hack it at college, the chances they're having a decent life are very small. So whatever answer there is to the kind of problems I'm talking about here can't only be make the college as rigorous as it used to be. You have to find alternatives for kids who you don't think should be going to that college.
You point out that a part of that college is extremely demanding in those literary courses and philosophical courses. Right. But isn't there some, doesn't this point out to an obligation to revive the idea of the vocational school, as in Germany? Well, no, and reduce, is it to one-third rather than 3/5?
I think you're absolutely right. The problem of the college as traditionally conceived, which has a certain kind of value, is unmanageable if the notion is that every occupation requires a college education, or has and if there is no alternative that has a form of respect and some degree of rigor, and such as the vocational schools or technical schools of Sweden and Germany and Switzerland and so on. And we don't have those.
And we never have. It's not a question of reviving.
We've just never created that. We've had a very disorderly form of entry into the labor market. And it's true, as Jim says, the only form of order that we've had has been the college. That's where the corporations go to recruit,
Right.
or the CIA, or the Army, and so on. I mean, that is the market
And
for
it's more,
moving
I think
in.
I'd like to
Isn't there
add
a lot
one
of
more
That's
thing.
a mistake.
And it's
There's
not
a lot
only
of
City
hypnotizing
College,
going
by
on
the way.
because,
Open admissions happens everywhere. Throughout, everyone goes to college in this country.
Yeah, I know. But my point truly is that the idea of a college as a place where you learn how to read,
Yeah.
because they didn't teach you how to read in high school, simply means that we are engendering an auto-hypnotic state in which we simply defer.
And
but
college becomes an entitlement.
Yeah.
That is, of course you're going to college because your right to go to college is the same as your right to go to high school.
But
And college can't be
is
thought
this
of
a
that
problem
way.
of higher education, or is it a political problem?
I think it's a
I
political
do too.
problem, and it's when I went to City College, I do not think there was an education major, for example. I'm probably wrong, but I don't recall.
I think there was an education school, maybe even when you went.
Maybe.
I think
but,
so.
a very long time ago. But the whole pattern of this kind of institution, and of course City has a very special history, but you can go to any other city and find these community colleges working basically with inner city kids. And many others in the suburbs and so on. The whole pattern of these schools, they are pre-vocational. And the vocations they are talking about are vocations that don't have any necessary connection with colleges do.
Right.
Nursing, business. I mean, why does one need a business undergraduate major to go into a business? And why? And nursing, of course, is a very legitimate field, but we used to do it in hospitals. We still do. The colleges grabbed it, and there were all these, and then they create all these fields, health,
Medical technology, things like
related
that.
to health, none of which need a college education.
Right.
And in fact, you might justify the 2-year community college education, something of that sort. But the colleges are in competition for students, so they themselves cooperate in their undermining. Now, it's true, you go to the top 20, 30, 40 institutions which can survive with academically oriented students which are competitive, but almost everyone else is in this kind of business, which is
Well, but if
corrupting.
so few people graduate, for instance, from James Monroe,
Yeah.
they can't get into CCNY, can
No,
they?
in fact, what's happening, one of the
these are all-
ironies
you're
of
talking
what's
about
happening
graduates.
is that the success of a place like City College, insofar as it's successful, is because the students who open admissions was intended for, these inner city kids who are falling behind, that population is being displaced by the immigrant population.
Yeah.
So you have a decreasing number of the kids who open admissions was designed to help, and an increasing number of this new population of kids who are, in many ways, the hope of the inner city. But that then raises the terrible question,
What about the
is this
others?
generation of kids going to be left behind by another class of immigrants? Which is precisely what seems to me to be
Yeah.
happening in New York and in other big cities.
What's
I
gonna
think the
stop
most
it from happening?
I think the only thing that's going to stop it from happening is, I mean, clearly, is changes in the school and in changes in the inner city culture. I think that the hard questions are, what do you do to change the school? And the even harder questions are, how do you make inner city culture less pathological? That's the tough question.
Yeah, I've returned to James Monroe, and aside from saying that the neighborhood looks the same, though I'm sure it's different, and the building looks the same, except that there is only now one entrance you can get in and out of, and there are always a dozen security men and women in front. Far too many, as far as they're doing nothing when you visit the building, but at any rate, that's considered necessary now. What is different is really more the students than anything else. Even teachers look like my old teachers. They have not changed as much. I mean, at least the ones I talked to and so on. You didn't have a sense of some terrible decline has occurred in the teaching force. I suspect there has been, because being a high school teacher in New York in the 40s was, a much better job than this today. But still, they don't look that different. It is the inner city culture problem which is different. And that is something that stymies all of us. And that is one of the reasons I'm willing to in part let City College off the hook. I mean, this is its clientele. What is it to do? But and what Jim shows in the book, it's being saved by the immigrants. They may know no English or anything, but as long as they've come from, as you said, Haiti or Colombia or Taiwan or Korea or Russia, they'll struggle through English for 2 years, and at this point they've had good educations in mathematics, which our local kids have it, and they have a different attitude to education, and that's what keeps the place going. Maybe what keeps the city going, though.
It's almost, at a place like City College, it's almost enough to be persistent. If you're persistent and self-disciplined, the standards are low enough that you can succeed. That huge dropout rate that the college has, which is about 60% or so, is of kids who have been so demoralized or so damaged, or whatever the proper word is, by their prior upbringing and by their high school education, that they can't even engage themselves at the school in the way that a lot of that class of immigrants can do.
Well, when you said that we need to remedy the situation through jobs and housing and health, as well as preaching and welfare reform, are you really contributing anything that we sort of don't know?
No, I'm talking about...
You want to change the environment, and don't we all? Yeah. But so programmatically, what does one tell Mayor Giuliani he ought to do?
Well, my book is about the consequences of all those failures.
Yeah,
and
right.
If it contributes anything, it's a way of talking about those consequences, and it's a way of separating out these different populations and seeing who's succeeding and seeing who's failing. I don't think that my prescriptions for what to do are radically original. I think, you know, people make fundamental decisions as to whether they think that the answer is the marketplace, that is, remove welfare, as Charles Murray wanted to do in his first book before he became famous for what he wanted to do in his second book, or whether the answer is some changes in welfare to prevent it from perpetuating this stuff, but also development, whether that's housing and healthcare and jobs.
What about ending open admission?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Well, raising the standard... Well, one possibility, which is not unreasonable, first of all, open admissions has been somewhat eroded, which is, and you might buy, in part due necessity, in part due income limitation. Further erosion is all for the best. Here, I think... I mean, I think there are no such things as the solution, but I think there are a lot of ideas, each of which contribute their 1%, like Al Shanker saying, if they knew you had to work harder to get into City College, there is that certain number who would then work harder to get into it. I mean, there's no question. People are affected by that. Not everyone is living for the moment, but some do look ahead and so on. But no one thing. So I think it would mean City College should be smaller and better. And accept the fact it should be smaller and better, and that we don't need four-year college educations for a lot of the jobs those kids are going for or will get.
My one very simple answer to this question, because there is one specific thing, is that you should say, in order to get into City College, you have to have received what's called an academic degree in New York City.
That's the easiest thing in the world.
You have to take academic classes.
Who has the authority to say that?
Well, in the end, the CUNY Board of Trustees would have to change the rules that govern admission standards.
It would be a very political thing.
I'll tell you a brief story that explains how hard it is. The current chancellor of CUNY, Ann Reynolds, is actually quite serious about trying to raise the standards. So she proposed something like this. You can't get in unless you have a real academic degree. But there was an escape clause because she knows that open admissions is politically untouchable. She said, if you don't get those courses, you can still go to the college, and then you have to make them up once you get there. Well,
which again is the same thing. It's an enormous remedial enterprise.
They're doing that anyway.
Yeah.
Right, but you can do that anyway, precisely.
Yeah. So do you see the beginnings of a movement to bring about that particular reform? Or
In the
you say
high
it's politically
schools,
untouchable?
No, I don't. At the level of City University, no. At the level of the high schools, yes. I think there is now a consensus such as did not exist before that high schools aren't remotely rigorous enough. The current schools chancellor has now basically thrown out all of the, what he calls honestly, bonehead math and bonehead science courses. You can't even take them anymore. But the schools are now, the culture of the schools is so geared to passivity and to mediocrity that to actually make that real, to make that commitment to standards real, is going to take huge change and a lot of time.
Well, Mr. Glaser, if as few as 150 people are graduating from James Monroe, and you made the standards tougher, then fewer than 150 will graduate, right?
That's right.
So what do we do
I'm not sure I think that's true, by the way. I don't think that's true. Well, I think that you have to basically make higher standards and then do everything you possibly can to raise those kids to those standards, knowing that you're going to lose some, but also believing you're going to get others.
Well, there I must say I would like to know more about those 150 graduates, only 3 of whom have Regents diplomas. They do it because, to what extent, and we won't know until we have to try it, to what extent are they doing it because why work hard? We get into college anyway, if we're so interested. Or is it that they feel that all this is beyond them and it's just...
Or is it purely attendance, right?
Yeah, so that suppose you were to say, you need a Regents diploma, and what that alone would do, I don't know. In order to say to go to the college,
your point is it might inspire people to get one.
Well, for one thing,
think
you said we're not going to offer any of the easy courses. You're going to have to take the more difficult courses. You will lose some, but I think also you will begin to change the culture of the schools. At the same time, to do that without making changes further down, and of course this gets us into the problem that where do you start, but to do that without starting further down is clearly purposeless.
Well, would you go so far as to say the CCNY ought to say, we're not going to teach people how to read.
Yeah.
It's the job of somebody else to teach them that before they get here.
Yeah, I would definitely say that.
If they could get away with it politically, they certainly should try it. That we do expect a college reading level. You should be reading at the 10th grade, which is only 2 years below graduation.
Or 11th grade or something. But the point is, yes,
something
I think they should insist on that. And I think, there are colleges all over the country that don't insist on that.
By the way, City College doubled or tripled in size the first year after open enrollment. There was no necessity for that. In terms of its resources and buildings and so on, it was just as good as a college with 6,000 people as one with 20,000. And it might well become smaller again. Now, then they'll say, and what about these other kids? And so, well, most of them are dropping out anyway, and they're just having a taste of college experience. And you say that we have to do that. We hope that this is not a purely static change, but has a dynamic effect in leading more people to work harder.
When you change community colleges, you say a community college should offer a decent vocational degree, and it should offer the remedial education that's currently being offered in the senior colleges. You shouldn't be offering that in the senior colleges.
We have only a few minutes. People will be disappointed if I don't ask you to comment on Professor Jeffries, to whom you devote a chapter. He's the anti-Semitic black professor of sociology. Does his longevity there suggest the political immobilization of the faculty?
Yeah, but not partially of the faculty, but in general it reflects the incredible power of racial blackmail cleverly used. And this man has been he's a bully. He's a smart bully, but he's an outright bully, and a crazy one besides. And he has been very well wielding the tools of racial blackmail by saying, if you touch a hair on my head, all of Harlem will rise, that kind of, and people believed it, and people feared that. And so during the moments when he could have been legitimately removed from his position as chairman of the department, nobody wanted to do anything. Well, and by the time they did something, it was too late.
One word. Certainly it is the cowardice of the college authorities that helps explain the story of Jeffries and his 20-year service as chairman of Black Studies. But two positive developments. They do have another kind of research-oriented Black Studies program, are now making appointments of good people outside his department. Yes. Under a very decent man, and so
came from Yale.
Okay, and with the Edmund Gordon, and with the pressure, which they were aroused into this by public pressure, I think now the black students will have alternatives. They can study black literature in the English department.
Right.
They can study.
Are they exercising that alternative?
That's right. Well, I hope so. They can study the black role in politics in the government department. So they don't have to go to black studies
anymore. There are a lot of black
anymore.
students at City College who are horrified by Jeffries, and I think will be increasingly glad to take the opportunity to study a real version of
an alternative being created.
Intimidated up until now?
Oh, certainly it's saying
no
one wants to say anything. They haven't had the alternatives. You certainly can't say anything in public. It's too dangerous. It's a very fraught environment. Yeah. Jeffries radiates this sense of menace. Yeah. He may not do anything, but he creates a sense of fear that preserves silence.
Yeah. Well, then, is it correct to say that there is a possibility of the emancipation of CCNY at every level, i.e. they recognize the obligations to do something about matriculation and recognize that they have to present an alternative to Kenneth Jeffries?
No,
is that going on?
That's probably a little too optimistic,
too far.
Because Jeffries isn't going anywhere, so the best you can do is create a parallel universe besides his. City College has no control over the admission standards, and nobody there would plump for doing the kind of things that I'm talking about or that Nat is talking about. That is going to be very hard to happen. The likelier effect, I think, is the increasing dissolution of that whole cadre of inner-city kids and their increasing replacement by immigrant students.
And there are possibilities, though, with the present political environment in the state, Republican governor, Mayor Giuliani, changes in the CUNY board. Conceivably, one can think of modest steps towards the kinds of things you were talking about in terms of raising the standards to something better approximating what a college should be.
Well, has there been, on the whole, a delinquency among the educators in New York at not collaborating to bring about these reforms?
You know, nobody wants to take away a right. That's not a trivial thing. That's a profound thing. When you grant a right, it becomes irrevocable. So once admission to higher education has become a right in New York City or Ohio or Indiana or anywhere, the chances of seriously abridging that without offering some kind of equal alternative politically is almost impossible, and morally is a very serious matter.
Yeah, well, and of course the other problem, coming back to Jeffries, is the whole question of academic tenure and the enormous costs involved in trying to act against a tenured professor, which of course City College didn't want to do anyway, because there was no president who had the nerve to act against this charlatan.
Thank you, Professor Glaser. Thank you, Mr. Traub, author of City on a Hill, ladies and gentlemen.
Next week on Firing Line, in the first of 4 programs on the Far East, Bill Buckley and his guests, Henry Kissinger and Jason Hugh, discuss the question of Taiwan's bid for UN membership. This program was a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support was provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line. For information about a video cassette of this program, write to Firing Line,